When my son passed away, my gold digger daughter-in-law showed up with the 8-year-old twins. "You've always been useless. Now take care of them." She disappeared for 5 years until I was accused of kidnapping them. At the hearing, my son appeared. "Sorry for my absence, it's time for the truth." She fainted when she saw him alive. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is William and I'm 65 years old. I never thought I'd be burying my son at this age. Brandon was only 32 when the police officer knocked on my door that Tuesday morning in September, his face grave as he delivered the news that shattered my world. "Mr. Henderson, I'm sorry to inform you that your son Brandon was involved in a fatal car accident last night." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My legs gave out, and I had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. Brandon, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his mother died when he was 12, was gone. Just like that. The funeral was held 4 days later at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. I sat in the front pew, staring at the closed casket draped with white lilies, still unable to process that my son was inside. The church was packed with Brandon's friends, colleagues from the construction company where he worked, and neighbors who'd watched him grow up. But it was Claire who drew all the attention. She arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in a black designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite her supposed grief, and she clutched a tissue in her manicured hand as she made her way down the aisle, sobbing dramatically. "Oh, Brandon," she wailed loudly enough for the entire church to hear. "Why did you have to leave us?" People turned to look at her with sympathy. Poor young widow, they probably thought. Left alone with 2 small children, I watched her performance with growing disgust. This was the same woman who had made my son's life miserable for the past 3 years of their marriage, the same woman who spent his paychecks on expensive clothes and salon treatments while he worked double shifts to pay the bills, the same woman who'd refused to let me see my grandchildren for months at a time whenever she was angry with Brandon. But today, she was playing the grieving widow perfectly. The twins, Jake and Emma, sat beside her in matching black outfits. At 8 years old, they looked confused more than sad. Emma kept asking why Daddy was in the box, and Jake just stared ahead with those big brown eyes that reminded me so much of Brandon at that age. After the service, people gathered around Claire, offering condolences and support. I stood alone by the graveside, watching as they lowered my son into the ground. The September wind cut through my old suit jacket, but I didn't move. I couldn't leave him there alone. "William?" I turned to find Claire approaching. Her tears miraculously dried now that most of the crowd had dispersed. The twins trailed behind her, holding hands. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold and businesslike now that the performance was over. "What about?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then stepped closer. "I can't do this anymore. I can't raise his children and be reminded of him every single day." My heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you always claimed you wanted to be more involved in their lives. Well, here's your chance." She grabbed each twin by the shoulder and pushed them toward me. "Take them." "Claire, you can't be serious. They're your children, too." "Nah, they're his children," she spat, pointing toward the fresh grave. "And you were always so eager to interfere, always criticizing how I raised them, so raise them yourself." Jake looked up at me with confusion. "Grandpa, where's Mommy going?" Before I could answer, Claire was already walking away. "I'll send their clothes later," she called over her shoulder without turning around. I watched in shock as she got into her silver BMW and drove away, leaving me standing at my son's graveside with 2 orphaned children clinging to my legs. "Grandpa," Emma whispered, tugging on my jacket, "is Mommy coming back?" I knelt down and pulled both children into my arms, feeling their small bodies trembling against mine. "I don't know, sweetheart, but you're going to stay with me for now, okay?" The drive back to my small house on Maple Street was silent, except for Emma's occasional sniffles. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the twins buckled into the back seat, still in their funeral clothes, looking lost and scared. My house suddenly felt inadequate. I had a 2-bedroom ranch that I'd been rattling around in since my wife Margaret died 5 years ago. 1 bedroom for me, one that served as my workshop where I built birdhouses and fixed neighbors' furniture to keep myself busy in retirement. "Are we going to live here now?" Jake asked as I unlocked the front door. "For now," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll figure it out as we go." That first night was chaos. I had no children's clothes, no proper food, no idea what 8-year-olds needed. I made them peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and let them sleep in my bed while I took the couch. Around midnight, I heard Emma crying. I found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "I want Daddy," she sobbed. I climbed into bed beside her and held her until she fell back asleep, my own tears falling silently into her hair. In one day, I'd lost my son and gained 2 children who needed me more than I'd ever been needed in my life. The next morning, Claire's promise to send their clothes proved as empty as every other promise she had ever made. No boxes arrived, no phone call, nothing. I took the twins to Walmart and spent $200 of my limited savings on clothes, toiletries, and anything else I thought they might need. They picked out matching Superman backpacks and seemed excited about the shopping trip, treating it like an adventure rather than the desperate scramble it really was. "Grandpa," Jake said as we loaded the car with their new things, "are you going to take care of us forever?" I looked into his innocent face, so much like Brandon's had been, and made a promise I had no idea how I'd keep. "As long as you need me to." 5 years. That's how long it took for me to transform from a grieving widower, enjoying a quiet retirement, into a full-time guardian of 2 energetic children. 5 years of learning that raising kids at 65 is nothing like raising them at 30. Those first few months were the hardest. I had to convert my workshop into a bedroom for the twins, selling my woodworking tools to buy bunk beds and a dresser. The smell of sawdust and wood stain was replaced by the chaos of children's toys and art supplies scattered across every surface. Emma had nightmares almost every night for the first year. She'd wake up screaming for Brandon, and I'd sit beside her bed reading stories until she fell back asleep. Jake was quieter in his grief, but I caught him talking to a framed photo of his father that he kept under his pillow. "Daddy, Grandpa made pancakes today, but they're not as good as yours," he whispered one morning, thinking I couldn't hear him from the hallway. The financial strain hit me immediately. My monthly Social Security check of $1,200 had been enough for me living alone, but feeding and clothing 2 growing children was impossible on that budget. I had to go back to work part-time at Henderson's hardware store, where I'd worked for 30 years before retiring. My old boss, Tom, was kind enough to give me 20 hours a week at minimum wage, but even that barely covered the groceries. I sold Margaret's jewelry, including her wedding ring, to pay for school supplies and clothes when the twins outgrew everything. That was one of the hardest days, walking into the pawn shop with the diamond ring I'd saved 2 months' salary to buy 40 years ago. But Jake needed new shoes, and Emma's jeans had holes in both knees. "How much for this?" I asked the clerk, my voice barely audible. $150, he said after examining the ring. It was worth at least $1,000, but I took the money anyway. The house started falling apart without the maintenance I could no longer afford. The roof leaked in the twins' bedroom during heavy rains, so I moved their beds around every storm. The water heater died in the middle of winter, and we took cold showers for 2 weeks until my next paycheck. But somehow, we made it work. I learned to cook meals I'd never attempted before. Spaghetti and meatballs became my specialty, though I burned the garlic bread more often than not. I figured out how to braid Emma's hair for school pictures and taught Jake to throw a football in the backyard. Even though my 67-year-old knees screamed in protest, the twins never complained, not once. They adapted to our new life with a resilience that amazed me. Emma started helping with laundry, standing on a step stool to reach the washing machine controls. Jake took responsibility for walking the neighbor's dog to earn $5 a week for our grocery fund. "Grandpa, do you miss having your own life?" Emma asked me one evening as we worked on her math homework at the kitchen table. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Well, you used to do different things before we came to live with you. Do you miss doing those things?" I looked at her serious 8-year-old face, her pencil poised over fractions that were giving her trouble, and realized something profound. This was my life now, not some temporary arrangement until Claire decided to be a mother again. This was exactly where I belonged. No, Emma, I don't miss my old life at all. School became our routine anchor. Every morning at 7:15, I'd drive them to Jefferson Elementary in my aging Honda Civic, and every afternoon at 3:30, I'd be waiting in the pickup line. I attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game where Jake spent more time picking dandelions than playing. Mrs. Patterson, their third-grade teacher, became an unexpected ally. She never asked uncomfortable questions about why the children lived with their grandfather, but she kept extra snacks in her desk for days when their lunch money ran short. Mr. Henderson, she told me during a conference in Jake and Emma's 4th grade year, I want you to know that your grandchildren are 2 of the most well-adjusted, kind children I've ever taught. Whatever you're doing it right. I cried in the car after that meeting, happy tears for once. The twins never mentioned Claire those first 3 years. It was as if she'd never existed. When other kids asked about their parents, they'd simply say they lived with their grandfather because their dad had died. They never mentioned having a mother at all. It wasn't until Emma turned 11 that she started asking questions. Grandpa, why doesn't Mommy ever call us? I was making dinner, standing over the stove stirring mac and cheese from a box, when her question stopped me cold. Jake looked up from his homework at the kitchen table, suddenly interested in my answer. I'd been dreading this conversation for 3 years. Your mommy was very sad when your daddy died, I said carefully. Sometimes, when people are that sad, they need time to figure things out. But we were sad too, Jake said quietly, and we didn't leave. The simple truth of that statement broke my heart. These children had lost their father and been abandoned by their mother, yet they'd never once made me feel like caring for them was a burden. You're right, I told them. You stayed, and I'm grateful for that every single day. By their 5th year with me, we'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. The twins were now 13 and starting to show signs of the teenagers they'd become. Emma had inherited her mother's sharp wit, but used it to make people laugh instead of cutting them down. Jake had his father's gentle nature and his grandfather's stubborn determination. I'd finally saved enough money to fix the roof and buy a used pickup truck that didn't break down every other month. The hardware store had given me a small raise, and I'd started a little side business fixing neighbors' furniture in the garage. Life wasn't easy, but it was good. We were a family. I should have known it wouldn't last. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 5 years after Brandon's funeral. I was getting ready for work while the twins got ready for school when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made my stomach clench with dread. William Henderson? The voice was professional, official. Yes, that's me. This is Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. We need to schedule a meeting with you regarding Jake and Emma Henderson. We've received some concerning allegations that need to be investigated. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. What kind of allegations? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to our office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the twins' school pictures on the refrigerator. They were laughing in both photos, gap-toothed grins that showed they felt safe and loved. Someone was trying to take them away from me. I just didn't know yet that it was the same person who'd abandoned them 5 years ago. The Child Protective Services office smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat in a plastic chair that was too small for my frame, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had turned white. At 70 years old, I never imagined I'd be sitting across from a social worker defending my right to care for my own grandchildren. Janet Morrison was younger than my grandson, Jake, probably fresh out of college, with her crisp blazer and clipboard full of forms. She had kind eyes, but I could see the skepticism there too. In her world, I was probably just another case file, another elderly man who'd bitten off more than he could chew. Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming in today, she began, flipping through a manila folder. I need to ask you some questions about your living situation with Jake and Emma. They're my grandchildren, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been caring for them since their father died 5 years ago. Yes, I have that information here. She glanced at her notes. But what I don't have is any legal documentation granting you guardianship. Can you explain that? My throat went dry. Their mother left them with me after the funeral. She said she couldn't take care of them anymore. And where is their mother now? I don't know. She disappeared that same day and never came back. Janet wrote something down, and I had the sinking feeling it wasn't good for my case. Mr. Henderson, we've received a complaint alleging that you essentially kidnapped these children. The complainant claims that you manipulated a grieving mother into abandoning her children so you could keep them for yourself. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not what happened at all. Claire dumped them on me at their father's graveside and drove away. I've been trying to contact her for 5 years. Do you have any proof of these attempts to contact her? I thought about it and realized with growing horror that I didn't. She changed her phone number. I didn't know where she moved. How was I supposed to contact her? The complainant also alleges that you've been collecting government benefits fraudulently by claiming these children as dependents without proper legal authority. I've never claimed any benefits, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I work part-time at a hardware store and fix furniture to support them. I've never taken a dime from the government. Janet made another note. I'm going to need to see your financial records, Mr. Henderson. Bank statements, tax returns, proof of income for the past 5 years. Of course, whatever you need. She set down her pen and looked at me directly. I also need to inform you that we'll be conducting interviews with Jake and Emma, both at school and possibly here at our office. We need to understand their perspective on their living situation. My heart pounded. You're going to question children about whether they want to live with the only family they have left? We need to ensure they're safe and that their best interests are being served. Their best interests? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice anymore. I've sacrificed everything for those kids. I sold my wife's jewelry to buy them clothes. I gave up my retirement to work again just to feed them. I learned to braid hair and help with algebra homework. Where was their mother's concern for their best interests when she abandoned them? Janet's expression softened slightly, but she remained professional. Mr. Henderson, I can see that you care deeply about these children, but the law requires proper documentation for guardianship arrangements. Without it, technically, you have no legal right to make decisions about their welfare. The room seemed to spin around me. So what happens now? We need to conduct a full investigation. During that time, the children will need to be placed in temporary foster care to ensure their safety. Foster care? I shot to my feet, the plastic chair scraping against the linoleum floor. You're going to put them with strangers? They've been through enough trauma in their lives. It's only temporary, Mr. Henderson. If our investigation determines that you're providing a safe, stable home environment, we can work toward making your guardianship legal and returning them to your care. How long will that take? It depends on what we find. A few weeks, maybe a month or two. I sank back into the chair, feeling every one of my 70 years. They're going to think I abandoned them too. Janet's voice was gentler now. We'll explain the situation to them in an age-appropriate way. Children are more resilient than we sometimes give them credit for. 2 days later, I watched through my kitchen window as a white sedan pulled into my driveway. Janet Morrison stepped out, followed by another social worker I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened the door before they could knock. Mr. Henderson, Janet said quietly, we're here to pick up Jake and Emma. The twins were in the living room doing homework. Emma was sprawled on the carpet with her math book, while Jake sat on the couch with his history project spread across the coffee table. They looked up when they heard voices at the door. Grandpa, Emma's voice was small, uncertain. What's happening? I knelt down beside her, my knees protesting, and took her hands in mine. Remember how I told you that sometimes grown-ups have to deal with complicated paperwork? Well, these nice people need you and Jake to stay somewhere else for a little while until we get everything sorted out. Jake dropped his pencil. Are we in trouble? Nobody, you're not in trouble. Nobody's in trouble. It's just something we have to do. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But I don't want to go somewhere else. I want to stay here with you. I pulled both children into my arms, breathing in the scent of Emma's strawberry shampoo and feeling Jake's skinny shoulders shaking against my chest. "I know, sweetheart, I don't want you to go either, but it's only for a little while, and then you'll come home." The second social worker, who'd introduced herself as Mrs. Chen, stepped forward with 2 small suitcases. "We've packed some of their belongings. They can take a few personal items if they'd like." Emma ran to her room and came back clutching a stuffed elephant that had belonged to her father when he was young. Jake grabbed the framed photo of Brandon from under his pillow. "Will you visit us?" Jake asked as we walked toward the car. "As soon as they let me," I promised, though I had no idea when that would be. I stood in my driveway long after the sedan disappeared around the corner, the house behind me, echoing with a silence I hadn't experienced in 5 years. Emma's math book still lay open on the living room floor, her pencil marking the spot where she'd been working on fractions. Jake's history project about the Revolutionary War was scattered across the coffee table, half finished. That night, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd watched the twins grow up in my care. I told her everything, hoping she might serve as a character witness if needed. "This is insane, William," she said, her voice crackling with indignation. "Those children are lucky to have you. Anyone with eyes can see how much you love them." But love, I was learning, wasn't always enough in the eyes of the law. 3 days after they took the twins, I received another call. This time, the number was familiar, though I hadn't seen it in 5 years. "Hello, William." Oh, Claire's voice was exactly as I remembered it, sweet and poisonous, like artificial honey. "Claire." I gripped the phone tighter. "Where the hell have you been?" "I've been getting my life together, building a stable future for my children, something you wouldn't understand." "Your children? You abandoned them at their father's funeral." "I was grieving, William. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I'm better now, and I want them back." The pieces suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "You're the one who called child services." "I had to. When I found out you'd been keeping my children from me all these years, claiming them as your own, I knew I had to act." "Keeping them from you? You disappeared? You never called, never wrote, never sent so much as a birthday card." "That's not how I remember it," she said smoothly. "I remembered trying to maintain contact and being blocked at every turn by a bitter old man who wanted to replace his dead son with my children. I felt like I was drowning." "That's not true, and you know it." "Well, it doesn't matter what either of us thinks anymore. The courts will decide what's best for Jake and Emma, and I have a feeling they'll agree that children belong with their mother, not some old man who can barely take care of himself." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my empty kitchen, staring at the twins' drawings, still held to the refrigerator with magnets. Emma's latest masterpiece showed the 3 of us standing in front of our house, all holding hands under a rainbow. She'd labeled it, "My Family," in careful 3rd-grade handwriting. For the first time since Brandon died, I wondered if the children would have been better off if I'd never agreed to take them in the first place. The courthouse smelled like old wood and failed dreams. I sat in the back row of the gallery, my only decent suit hanging loose on my frame. I'd lost 15 pounds in the 3 weeks since they'd taken Jake and Emma, the stress eating away at me like cancer. My court-appointed attorney, David Walsh, was younger than my grandson and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd been assigned to my case 48 hours ago and had spent exactly 20 minutes reviewing my file before this hearing. "Mr. Henderson," he'd told me during our brief meeting, "I have to be honest with you. Without proper legal documentation establishing your guardianship, this is going to be an uphill battle." "But I've been their primary caregiver for 5 years, I'd protested. "Unfortunately, caring for children and having legal authority to care for them are 2 different things in the eyes of the law." Now, sitting in this courtroom, watching Claire take the witness stand, I understood just how steep that hill really was. She looked nothing like the woman who'd abandoned her children 5 years ago. Gone was the flashy, high-maintenance appearance. Instead, she wore a conservative navy dress, minimal makeup, and had styled her hair in a simple ponytail. She looked like someone's responsible mother, not the gold digger who'd made my son's life miserable. "Mrs. Henderson," her attorney began, "can you tell the court about the circumstances surrounding your children's placement with their grandfather?" Claire dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before answering. I was devastated by my husband's death. I wasn't thinking clearly. When William offered to help with the children temporarily, I thought it would give me time to grieve and get back on my feet. I wanted to scream. William offered. She'd literally pushed the kids toward me and driven away. "And did you intend for this arrangement to be permanent?" the attorney continued. "Absolutely not. I always planned to reunite with my children once I was emotionally stable enough to care for them properly." "What steps did you take to maintain contact with Jake and Emma during this time?" Claire's voice grew stronger, more confident. "I tried repeatedly to contact them. I called, I sent letters, I even showed up at the house several times. But William refused to let me see them. He said they were better off without me." The lies flowed so smoothly from her lips that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory. But then I remembered Emma's nightmares, Jake's conversations with his father's photograph, and the complete absence of any attempts by Claire to contact her children in 5 years. When it was my turn to testify, David Walsh led me through the basic facts of the case with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "Mr. Henderson, you've been caring for Jake and Emma for approximately 5 years, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And during that time, did their mother maintain contact with them?" "No, she didn't. She left them with me at their father's funeral and disappeared. I never heard from her again until she called 3 days after Child Services took the children." "Did you ever try to contact her?" I hesitated, knowing how this would sound. Her phone number was disconnected. I didn't know where she'd moved. I had no way to reach her. "But you didn't seek legal guardianship through the courts?" No. I thought since she'd left them with me and since I was their only family, that I could just take care of them. I didn't know I needed legal papers. I could see the judge writing notes, and none of it looked good for my case. Claire's attorney stood for a cross-examination, and I knew I was about to be torn apart. "Mr. Henderson, isn't it true that you saw your daughter-in-law's grief as an opportunity to gain permanent custody of children you'd always felt should be yours?" "That's not true." "Isn't it true that you actively discouraged her from maintaining contact with her own children?" "No, that never happened." "You expect this court to believe that a mother would abandon her children for 5 years without a single attempt at contact?" "I can only tell you what actually happened." "Mr. Henderson, you're 70 years old. Do you really think you're capable of raising 2 teenagers?" The question hit me like a slap. I've been doing it for 5 years, with considerable financial struggle. Isn't that correct? You work part-time at minimum wage. You've had to sell personal belongings to support these children. Your house is in disrepair. Is that really the best environment for Jake and Emma? I felt my cheeks burn with shame. I've given them everything I could. Everything except a legal home, Mr. Henderson. Everything except the stability that comes from proper legal guardianship. When Claire retook the stand for redirect examination, she painted a picture of a woman who'd spent 5 years rebuilding her life for her children. "I've completed grief counseling," she testified. "I have a stable job now as a receptionist at a dental office. I've remarried a wonderful man who's excited to help me raise Jake and Emma. We have a 4-bedroom house in a good school district." She pulled out photographs of a suburban home with a manicured lawn and a swing set in the backyard. It looked like something from a magazine compared to my aging ranch house with its patched roof and secondhand furniture. "I've made mistakes," she continued, her voice breaking with perfectly timed emotion. "I was young and overwhelmed when my husband died. But I never stopped loving my children, and I never stopped working toward the day when I could bring them home." The judge called a recess, and I found myself alone in the hallway with David Walsh. "Mr. Henderson, I think we need to discuss a plea arrangement," he said quietly. "What kind of arrangement?" "Claire's attorney has offered supervised visitation rights. You could see Jake and Emma twice a month for 4 hours each visit, supervised by a social worker." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's what you're recommending? That I give up children I've raised for 5 years for 8 hours a month? Look, I'll be frank with you. You have no legal standing here. Claire is their biological mother. She appears to have her life together now. And you're an elderly man with limited resources who never sought proper legal guardianship. The court is likely to rule in her favor, regardless. What about what Jake and Emma want? They're minors. The court will consider their preferences, but it won't be the deciding factor." I walked outside the courthouse into the October afternoon, feeling older than my 70 years. Cars rushed past on the busy street, people hurrying to lives that made sense, unlike mine, which seemed to be crumbling around me. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "How did it go?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Not good." Yes. That evening, I drove past Jefferson Elementary just as school was letting out. I couldn't help myself. I needed to see Jake and Emma, even from a distance. I spotted them walking toward a silver minivan, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. They looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. Emma saw me first. She dropped her backpack and started running toward my car before the woman with them, their temporary foster mother, caught her arm and pulled her back. I could see Emma's mouth moving, probably calling my name, but I couldn't hear her through the car windows. Jake stood beside the minivan, not moving, just staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Was it anger? Disappointment? Did he blame me for letting them be taken away? The foster mother said something to both children and ushered them into the van. As it pulled away, I saw Emma's face pressed against the rear window, her small hand flat against the glass. I sat in my car in that school parking lot for 20 minutes, crying like I hadn't cried since Margaret died. These children had lost their father, been abandoned by their mother, and now they were losing me too. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. When I finally drove home, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Some secrets are worth more than children. Stop fighting this, or everyone will learn the truth about your precious son's death." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature to know who'd sent it. Claire wasn't just fighting for custody. She was playing a game I didn't understand, with rules I'd never learned, and somehow she held cards I didn't even know existed. The next hearing was scheduled for the following week, and I had the sinking feeling that whatever Claire was hiding, she was prepared to use it to destroy what little chance I had left of keeping my grandchildren. I looked around my empty house at the photos of Jake and Emma that covered every surface, at the homework assignments still stuck to the refrigerator, at the bunk beds in their room that I couldn't bear to dismantle. If Claire wanted to play dirty, she'd picked the wrong fight. These children were all I had left of my son, and I wasn't going to lose them without a fight, even if that fight destroyed me in the process. The threatening note sat on my kitchen table like a coiled snake, its words burned into my memory. Some secrets are worth more than children. What could Claire possibly know about Brandon's death? The police had ruled it an accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit my son's pickup truck head on. Brandon died instantly, they said. What secret could there be? But that note meant Claire knew something, or at least thought she did, and she was willing to use it to take my grandchildren away from me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jake and Emma's faces pressed against the foster home van window. By dawn, I'd made a decision that would either save my case or destroy what little money I had left. At 8 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in the office of Marcus Webb, a private investigator whose ad I'd found in the Yellow Pages. His office was above a pawn shop downtown, with water stains on the ceiling and furniture that had seen better decades, but his eyes were sharp, and when I told him my story, he listened without judgment. "So let me get this straight," Marcus said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "Your daughter-in-law abandoned her kids 5 years ago, shows up now claiming you kidnapped them, and she's threatening to reveal some secret about your son's death?" "That's right. And you have no idea what the secret might be?" I shook my head. "Brandon's death was ruled an accident. The other driver was drunk, had a history of DUI arrests. There was nothing suspicious about it." Marcus made notes on a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Henderson, in my experience, people like your daughter-in-law don't make threats unless they have something to back them up. Even if it's not true, even if it's twisted or taken out of context, there's usually some kernel of fact they're working with. So what do? We find out what she knows before she can use it against you. My rate is $50 an hour plus expenses. I'll need a retainer of $500 to get started." $500. That was most of what remained in my savings account after 5 years of supporting the twins on my limited income. But what choice did I have? Do it, I said, pulling out my checkbook with trembling hands. Marcus started by going through Brandon's death investigation file, which he obtained through contacts at the police department. We met 3 days later at a diner near the courthouse. I've got good news and bad news, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. The good news is that everything about the accident investigation looks legitimate. The drunk driver, Robert Kowalski, definitely caused the crash. Blood alcohol level was 0.21, well over the legal limit. And the bad news? Marcus pulled out a manila folder. The bad news is that there are some details that could be misinterpreted by someone with bad intentions. He spread several documents across the table. Your son was driving on Riverside Drive at 11:30 at night. That's not unusual, except that Riverside Drive isn't on the route from his job site to his house. I frowned. Maybe he stopped somewhere first. Maybe. But here's the thing. Riverside Drive goes right past the Moonlight Motel. And according to the motel records I managed to get, someone paid cash for room 12 that night. No name on the register, but the timing matches up with when your son would have been in the area. My stomach dropped. You think Brandon was having an affair? I don't think anything yet. I'm just telling you what someone could make this look like, especially if that someone had more information than what's in the official file. Marcus pulled out another document. There's something else. Your son's cell phone records show several calls to an unlisted number in the weeks before his death. I tracked it down. It belongs to a woman named Lisa Martinez. The name meant nothing to me. Who is she? That's what we need to find out. But here's what worries me. If Claire knows about these phone calls, if she knows about the motel room, she could paint a picture of your son that would make the court question whether you're the kind of family these kids should be with. I felt sick. Even if it's not true? Truth is relative in custody cases, Mr. Henderson. Perception matters more than facts sometimes. That afternoon, Marcus and I drove to Lisa Martinez's address. She lived in a modest apartment complex on the south side of town. When she answered the door, I immediately saw why someone might think she'd been involved with Brandon. She was attractive, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair and kind eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking between Marcus and me with obvious confusion. "Ms. Martinez, my name is William Henderson. I'm Brandon Henderson's father." Her face went pale. "Oh my God, I heard about the accident. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you. I know this might sound strange, but we're trying to understand why Brandon was calling you in the weeks before his death." Lisa stepped aside and invited us in. Her apartment was neat and simple, with photos of a young boy scattered around the living room. "Brandon was helping me," she said once we were seated. "My ex-husband owed me 3 years of child support, but every time I tried to collect, he'd disappear or change jobs. Brandon knew someone who could track him down." "Brandon was helping you find your ex-husband?" "He didn't even charge me. Said he knew what it was like to struggle financially." She gestured toward the photos. "That's my son, Miguel. He's 8 now. Brandon said he reminded him of his own kids." Marcus leaned forward. "And the meetings? Did you meet Brandon in person?" Lisa nodded. "A few times, usually at that diner on 5th Street. But the night he died, we were supposed to meet at the Moonlight Motel." My heart stopped. "The motel?" "Not for what you're thinking," Lisa said quickly, seeing my expression. "My ex-husband was staying there with his new girlfriend. Brandon was going to help me serve him with papers. We were going to wait in the parking lot until he came out. So Brandon was at the motel on legitimate business." "Absolutely. He was just trying to help a single mother get the child support she was owed." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "He never made it to the meeting. I waited in the parking lot until midnight, then drove home. I found out about the accident the next morning." Marcus and I exchanged glances. This put an entirely different spin on Brandon's presence in that area. "Ms. Martinez," Marcus said, "would you be willing to testify to this in court if necessary?" "Of course. Brandon was a good man. If there's anything I can do to help his family, I'll do it." We left Lisa's apartment with hope for the first time in weeks. But Marcus cautioned me that we still didn't know what Claire actually knew or planned to use against us. "We need more," he said, as we drove back toward town. "Character witnesses, documentation of your relationship with the kids, proof that you've been a good guardian." Over the next week, I threw myself into gathering evidence. Mrs. Rodriguez, my neighbor, agreed to testify about how she'd watched me care for Jake and Emma over the past 5 years. Mrs. Patterson, their former teacher, provided a letter describing them as well-adjusted, happy children who clearly loved their grandfather. The principal at Jefferson Elementary wrote a statement about my consistent presence at school events, my involvement in their education, and the positive changes he'd observed in both children since they'd come to live with me. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatrician who had been caring for the twins, provided medical records showing they'd received consistent, appropriate health care under my guardianship. She also noted in her letter that both children spoke affectionately about their grandfather and showed no signs of abuse or neglect. Tom, my old boss at the hardware store, wrote about my work ethic and dedication to providing for my grandchildren, even when it meant taking on extra hours at my age. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Father Martinez from St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where we'd held Brandon's funeral, had been watching our family quietly for 5 years. I've seen William at every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, he told Marcus during an interview. I've watched him learn to braid a little girl's hair and help a boy with his homework. I've seen him go without new clothes so those children could have what they needed. If that's not love, I don't know what is. By the time we finished preparing our defense, we had 12 character witnesses, medical records, school records, and documentation of every sacrifice I'd made for Jake and Emma over the past 5 years. But I still had no idea what Claire was planning to spring on us. The night before the final hearing, I sat in the twins' empty bedroom, surrounded by their drawings and school projects that I'd carefully preserved. I picked up a Father's Day card Emma had made me the year before, with stick figures of the three of us holding hands under a rainbow. "Dear Grandpa," she'd written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, "thank you for taking care of us when nobody else wanted to. You are the best daddy we ever had. Love, Emma." Reading those words again, I realized that no matter what Claire threw at us tomorrow, I'd already won something precious. For 5 years, I'd been the father those children needed. I'd given them stability, love, and a sense of family when the world had taken everything else away from them. Claire could threaten me with secrets. She could paint Brandon as something he wasn't. She could try to destroy our family with lies and manipulation. But she couldn't take away the 5 years of bedtime stories, homework help, scraped knee bandaging, and unconditional love that had made us a real family. Tomorrow, I would fight for Jake and Emma with everything I had, because they weren't just my grandchildren anymore. They were my children in every way that mattered. And I wasn't going to lose them without a fight that would be remembered long after the gavel fell. The courthouse was packed for the final hearing. I sat with David Walsh at the defendant's table, my hands folded to hide their trembling. Behind me, I could hear the whispered conversations of my character witnesses, Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Patterson, Father Martinez, and others who'd come to support me. Claire sat at the plaintiff's table with her high-powered attorney, wearing another conservative outfit that made her look like the perfect mother. She'd even brought her new husband, a clean-cut man in an expensive suit, who nodded sympathetically whenever she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, called the court to order. "We're here today for the final hearing in the matter of Henderson versus Henderson, regarding custody of minor children Jake and Emma Henderson." David Walsh stood to present our case first. He called Mrs. Rodriguez to the stand, who testified about watching me care for the children with patience and love. Mrs. Patterson described Jake and Emma as happy, well-adjusted children who clearly adored their grandfather. Father Martinez was particularly compelling. "I've performed many funerals in my 30 years as a priest," he told the court. "I've seen how grief can destroy families or bring them together. In William Henderson's case, tragedy transformed him into exactly the father figure those children needed." But I could see Claire's attorney smirking as if he knew something we didn't. When it was their turn to present, he stood with the confidence of someone holding all the winning cards. "Your Honor," he began, while the defendant's witnesses paint a touching picture of an elderly man caring for his grandchildren, they overlook the fundamental issue here, Mr. Henderson has built his entire case on the premise that my client abandoned these children. But what if that's not true? What if Mr. Henderson manipulated the situation from the beginning? He turned toward Claire. Mrs. Henderson Williams, please tell the court about the circumstances surrounding your children's placement with their grandfather. Claire took the stand again, but this time her testimony was different, more detailed, more damaging. I was devastated by Brandon's death, she began, but I never intended to abandon my children. William convinced me that I needed time to grieve, that he would care for them temporarily while I got professional help. And did you seek professional help? Yes, I entered a grief counseling program. I have the documentation here. She handed papers to the bailiff. I was in intensive therapy for 6 months. I wanted to scream. This was the first time I'd heard anything about grief counseling. Did you maintain contact with your children during this time? I tried to. I called repeatedly, but William said the children were too upset to talk to me. He said hearing my voice would set back their healing process. Another lie. I'd never spoken to her during those 5 years, never prevented any contact because there had been no attempts at contact. Mrs. Henderson Williams, did there come a time when you discovered something disturbing about the circumstances of your husband's death? Claire's attorney was moving into dangerous territory now, and I felt my stomach clench with dread. Yes, Claire said, her voice growing stronger. About 6 months ago, I learned that Brandon wasn't just an innocent victim that night. He was involved in something that puts his character and his father's judgment into serious question. Can you elaborate? Claire looked directly at me as she spoke. Brandon was meeting another woman at the Moonlight Motel the night he died. He was having an affair. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I shot to my feet. That's not true. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Mr. Henderson, sit down. David Walsh grabbed my arm and pulled me back into my chair, but I could see the doubt in his eyes now. Claire continued her testimony. I have phone records showing multiple calls between Brandon and this woman in the weeks before his death. I have the motel receipt showing someone paid cash for a room that night, and I have a witness who saw them together. Your Honor, David Walsh stood, we object to this testimony. It's irrelevant to the custody matter and highly prejudicial. On the contrary, Claire's attorney replied, it goes directly to the question of Mr. Henderson's judgment and the moral environment he would provide for these children. If he was aware of his son's infidelity and approved of it, what kind of values is he teaching Jake and Emma? Judge Morrison considered this. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to the custody issue. Claire's attorney nodded. Mrs. Henderson Williams, based on what you learned about your late husband's activities, what concerns do you have about your children's welfare with their grandfather? I'm concerned that William knew about Brandon's affair and said nothing to me. I'm concerned about the values being taught to my children, and I'm concerned that a man who would cover up adultery might cover up other things that could harm Jake and Emma. The testimony continued for another hour, with Claire painting me as an enabling father who'd raised a son with questionable morals and couldn't be trusted with children. When it was our turn for a cross-examination, David Walsh did his best to poke holes in her story. Mrs. Henderson Williams, you say you were in grief counseling for 6 months after your husband's death. Can you provide the name of your counselor? Dr. Rebecca Singh at Riverside Mental Health. And you have documentation of this treatment? Yes, it's in the file I provided. David looked confused. This was clearly not going as he'd expected. You also claim that you tried to maintain contact with your children. Do you have phone records showing these attempted calls? Some of them. William changed his number after a few months and I couldn't reach him anymore. Another lie. But how could I prove it? Mrs. Henderson Williams, if you were so concerned about your children's welfare with their grandfather, why did you wait 5 years to seek custody? Claire's voice broke slightly. I was following my counselor's advice to give the children time to stabilize. Dr. Singh felt that disrupting their routine too quickly could cause more trauma. I was putting their needs before my own desires. It was a perfect answer, delivered with just the right amount of maternal concern. When David sat down, I knew we were in trouble. Claire had answered every question smoothly, had documentation for her claims, and had painted me as either a knowing accomplice to Brandon's supposed affair or a gullible fool who couldn't see what was happening in his own family. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess, and I followed David into the hallway. "This isn't going well," he said bluntly. "Her story is consistent. She has documentation, and she's painted your son in a very bad light. But it's not true. Brandon wasn't having an affair. He was helping that woman with a legal matter. Can you prove that?" I thought about Lisa Martinez, waiting back in Marcus Webb's office in case we needed her testimony. "Actually, yes, I can." David looked skeptical. "At this point, any witness you produce is going to look like a desperate attempt to cover up the truth." Before I could respond, commotion erupted behind us. People were shouting, running toward the courtroom doors. Through the chaos, I heard someone yelling my name. William Henderson!" I turned and felt the world stop spinning. Walking down the courthouse hallway, very much alive and flanked by two men in suits, was my son, Brandon. The blood drained from my face. My knees buckled, and only David's quick reflexes kept me from collapsing. Around us, people were pointing and whispering. Someone was calling for security. Brandon looked older, thinner, with a beard that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But it was definitely him. My son, who I'd buried, who I'd grieved for, who I'd thought was gone forever. He reached me in 3 quick strides and pulled me into his arms. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through this." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just held on to him, feeling his solid presence, hearing his voice, smelling the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with 5 years of absence. "Brandon?" I finally managed to whisper. "How? The accident, the funeral? It's a long story, Dad. But right now, we need to get into that courtroom. Claire has a lot of explaining to do." As we walked back toward the courtroom doors, I could see Claire through the glass window. She was slumped in her chair, her face white as paper, her carefully composed facade completely shattered. Her attorney was frantically shuffling through papers, probably trying to figure out how to explain why his client had just lost custody of children to a man who was supposedly dead. But I wasn't thinking about legal strategy anymore. I was thinking about Jake and Emma, about how they were going to react when they saw their father again. I was thinking about 5 years of unnecessary grief, 5 years of Claire living off Brandon's life insurance while I struggled to raise his children on Social Security. Most of all, I was thinking about the questions that needed answers. Where had Brandon been for 5 years? Why had he let us believe he was dead? And what had Claire done to force him into hiding? As we entered the courtroom, Judge Morrison looked up from her papers and did a double-take that would have been comical under different circumstances. "Bailiff," she said slowly, "I think we're going to need to postpone this hearing, and someone should probably call the police." Brandon squeezed my shoulder. "It's time for the truth, Dad, all of it." Claire hadn't just lost her custody case, she was about to lose everything. And for the first time in 5 years, I was going to get my family back.